Question 55 of the Summa Theologia continues in St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on Angelic Epistemology, or the knowledge of the angels. And as I mentioned yesterday, really what he's trying to do is distinguish the angels from divine knowledge and also human knowledge. And I would say principally he's trying to help us better understand the significance of knowledge for us as it relates to God, with the angels being in kind of an intermediary place. In fact, he even refers to that in this question. And so when we talk about the medium of the angelic knowledge, you should understand that in order for anything to know something, there has to be a subject, and that's the one that knows. And then there's also an object. There has to be something it comes to the knowledge of. And so in these three articles, St. Thomas Aquinas is trying to just kind of explore, how is that? What's the medium? What is the apparatus or the methodology by which the angels come to know things? Because as we'll find out, and as he'll explain, we come to know things through our senses, working with our intellect, but the angels don't have senses. The angels don't have bodies. And so how in the world do they come to know things? And so it's quite interesting, and I think you'll enjoy these three articles. The first one says whether the angels know all things by their substance. Now, this may sound very familiar because he has asked a question before about is the angelic knowledge the same as substance and essence and existence? And I mentioned in that question that he was trying to really drive the point that the angels' knowledge is not the same as God's knowledge. It's very different, but it's closer to the divine knowledge than ours is, but at the same time it's very different. So he's still kind of beating that same drum, and he wants to definitely distinguish the mode, the medium in which the angels come to know things, as opposed to how it works with the divine knowledge. And so that's kind of what he's getting at here. This is the most challenging of the three articles, and so we'll see if we can get through this one. The medium through which the intellect understands is compared to the intellect understanding it as its form. Okay, we come to know things through our senses, but also through our intellectual form, or the soul, which is the form of the human person, is the intellectual soul, right? Because it is by the form that the agent acts. Now, in order that the faculty may be perfectly completed by the form, it is necessary for all things to which the faculty extends to be contained under the form. And this, it's challenging language, but what he's saying is, with the divine knowledge, everything is in God. God, the knowledge of all things pre-exist in God. And so with us, when we know something, it becomes a part of us, as he's already explained. When we love something, when we, it becomes a part of us. It's a very intimate and beautiful way of looking at knowledge, which very rarely do we ever hear about. We kind of possess these things inside us. And it's very significant. And when we get to human epistemology, it's going to be very significant. Hence it is that in things which are corruptible, the form does not perfectly complete the potentiality of the matter, because the potentiality of the matter extends to more things than are contained under this or that form. I got to admit, that sentence there, challenging, but I'm going to move on because it makes more sense. But the intellective power of the angel extends to understanding all things, because the object of the intellect is universal being or universal truth. But that's also the case for us. The object of our intellect is universal being, as he is going to point out in the Treatise on Human Nature. So it sounds like he's distinguishing the angels as this being proper to the angels, and that's certainly not the case. But anyways, the angel's essence, however, does not comprise all things in itself. Remember, intellect for us is a power of the soul. It's not the essence, as it is with God, since it is an essence restricted to a genus and species. This is proper to the divine essence, which is infinite simply and perfectly to comprise all things in itself. Interesting, infinite simplicity, and perfection, all mentioned within about 6 words. Okay, these attributes of God are so important in order to understand everything else in the Summa. Okay, I know I say that a lot. So, anyways, therefore, God alone knows all things by his essence. Okay, God alone knows all things by his essence. No creature can know all things by their essence. We know it through our intellect, through our senses, and the angel through their intellect, right? But an angel cannot know all things by his essence, and his intellect must be perfected by some species in order to know things. All right, so it's just, again, like I said, it's a distinguishing between God and angels with regard to knowledge. All right, that's the hardest one. The next 2 are a little bit easier, at least to me they are. Article number 2, whether the angels understand by species drawn from things. Now, when we get, I don't want to give too much of this away, but when we get to human epistemology, you're going to learn about something called abstraction of phantasms. And it's one of the most fascinating parts of the Summa to me is how we come to know things. And we abstract from phantasms from physical objects in order to understand their form, their essence, what they are, the universals, right? But here he's saying in this article is that the angels don't do that. They don't have to. He says the species whereby the angels understand are not drawn from things, but are co-natural to them. That's the same as infusion. They're infused into the angels, the knowledge, right? For we must observe that there is a similarity between the distinction and order of spiritual substances and the distinction and order of corporeal structures. All right, corporeal structures, corporeal substances. That would be us. We're a corporeal substance. We have bodies, right? Okay, so the lower intellectual substances, that is human souls, okay, we are lower intellectual substances, have a power of understanding which is not naturally complete. It's not infused, but is successively completed in them by their drawing intelligible species from things. Okay, so when I hold this up, you just abstracted a phantasm of highlighterness out of this, right? You saw it, and then your mind was able to abstract the form, the phantasm. But anyway, we'll get more into that as we go along. It's really exciting. But in the higher spiritual substances, that is the angels, the power of understanding is naturally complete by intelligible species, insofar as they have such species co-natural to them, so as to understand all things which they can know naturally, everything they can know naturally. So take a tree, for example. We didn't know a tree until we experienced a tree. The angels created with treeness the knowledge of trees already in their minds, okay? They don't have to go and see a tree and learn about it. They already know about it. The angels are utterly free from bodies and subsist immaterially and in their own intelligible nature. Consequently, they attain their intelligible perfection through, I love this, an intelligible outpouring, whereby they receive from God the species of things known together with their intellectual nature. All right, so when an angel is created, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because we're gonna have information about this coming, but it all comes at the moment they're created. Right, it's very interesting. Article 3, the last article, whether the higher angels understand by more universal species than the lower angels. Okay, there's 9 choirs or orders of angels, starting with the seraphim at the top, and then the angels, like guardian angels down at the bottom. Archangels, we think of them as being really exalted, but they're the second to the lowest. All right, and then this is going to come. We're going to have an article in the Summa about this as well. Okay, whether the higher angels understand by more universal species than the lower angels. All right, hopefully I can explain this because this is really important. And it says, for this reason are some things of a more exalted nature, because they are nearer to and more like unto the first, which is God. Now in God, the whole plenitude of intellectual knowledge is contained in one thing, that is to say, in the divine essence, by which God knows all things. All right, this is what we just distinguished a couple articles ago, that this is not the case for the angels, that God in his essence knows all things. It's part of who he is. It's just it's natural to him to know all things, and all things pre-exist in God, right? In an instant. Okay, he doesn't have to go learning things. He knows everything, as we learned previously, right? This plenitude of knowledge is found in created intellects in a lower manner and less simply. Consequently, it is necessary for the lower intelligences, angels and us, to know by many forms what God knows by one. Okay, he knows everything in one form. By so many forms, the more according to the intellect is lower. An example that St. Thomas Aquinas will use in another part of the Summa is a house. Okay, if I say the word house to you, you think about probably a roof and a door and shutters and windows and a garage and all these different parts of the house. But you're thinking of it like one concept that's very complicated. But at the same time, you could think of all those individual parts separately that make up a house. That's kind of an example of how God knows things universally. All right, the last paragraph here. Thus, the higher the angel is, by so much the fewer species will he be able to apprehend the whole mass of intelligible objects. Therefore, his forms must be more universal, each one of them, as it were, extending to more things. Okay, so the house extends to all these things that make up the house, as opposed to all the different little parts. Now, I love this example that he uses here. He says an example of this can in some measure be observed in ourselves. For some people there are who cannot grasp an intelligible truth unless it be explained to them in every part and detail. This comes of their weakness of intellect, while there are others of strong intellect who can grasp many things from few. You take something like Thomistic philosophy. Some people can grasp it real quickly, and they can see concepts within Thomistic philosophy simply. And some people, it's really hard. You got to teach individual things. You could take any example, physics or, working on a house or being a plumber, and some people just grasp it naturally and they understand the big picture and how to do things. Other people, it takes a lot more time to figure it out, and you got to do all these individual things. So even within human beings, we can see this hierarchy of universals, but in this case, he's talking about it being the case with angels. All right, that brings us to an end of question 55. 56 is going to be tomorrow of the angel's knowledge of immaterial things. Now, an angel itself is an immaterial thing, so how does it know itself? How does it know other angels? How does it know God? Those are going to be the articles that St. Thomas Aquinas is going to be concerned about in tomorrow's lesson. Well, thank you so much for journeying through the Summa with me, one question at a time. I hope you are enjoying this, and every now and then I like to do a little check and say, how many people have watched all of the videos? Okay, have you watched 55 days in a row? Maybe not 55 days in a row, but 55 videos, and are you still with it? And so I always say this at the end of the video, because if I say at the beginning, no guarantee that you're watching until the end. But anyways, I try to keep these as brief as possible. So having said that, I'm going to close out, and I thank you for watching. God bless you. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.